It was a lazy Sunday afternoon and Dan was doing his usual thing, spending his time on the couch flipping around from game to game. As he was getting real comfy, he started to doze off when it happened. This commercial came on, a commercial for the brand new T3000 turbo motorcycle. He'd always dreamed of owning this bike. Cruising around America, just him and the open road, thoughts began running through his head about all the adventures he'd have and the places he could go. He could almost feel the wind in his hair when all of a sudden his dream came crashing down for the low price of $35,000. He's not sure who on earth thinks that's low, but it's certainly not him. There's no way he could afford that. At least I have my dreams. But as fate would have it, an opportunity came on the television. An opportunity to win that bike. A brand new gym was opening up in town. To increase their membership and raise awareness on health, they were running a contest. A really big contest. How much weight can you lose in a year? At first, Dan thought that was pretty extreme. A year? That's a big commitment. Well, this was not an accident, as the gym knew what they were doing, as Dan would find out later. In reality, it had been a while since Dan had ever been to the gym. It's been a long while. Actually, the more he thought about it, and if he was being honest, Dan had never been to a gym. Ever. Sure, when he was a kid, he played the usual pickup games of basketball and would throw the ball around once in a while, but he never really took his fitness that seriously. As he grew older, life did what life does and began putting all of the usual stresses on him. You know, work, family work, social life, domestic chores, a little more work. All of this had taken a toll on his health, and by health we mean he gained weight. He had seen a video from the TWS channel and heard all about what can happen if one has too much extra weight. Higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, and even cancer. It seemed that high body fat resulted in an increase in every disease. However, that still never motivated him. And then the commercial announced the winning prize, a free one-year membership and $35,000. This was a chance for getting the bike of his dreams. Rubbing his ever-growing belly, he knew this was a real chance to get fit and win his bike. Like many people, Dan has the desire to lose weight. Some do it to look better, some do it for health reasons, and some people do it to win a bike. Actually, Dan is probably the only person to lose weight just to win a bike. Regardless of the reason, losing weight for a year is an aspirational goal. As a newbie, there is a lot that Dan is going to need to learn if he wants to optimize his total weight loss. There are so many different variables that could affect his total loss. His training, nutrition, and sleep. These are just a few areas he will need to change if he wants to get his bike. However, if he gets it right, Dan could lose a considerable amount over the next 365 days. How much? We'll look at his journey to see what he learns, mistakes he makes, and where he gets it right. Heck, there's even a possibility he could throw in the towel and gain weight. Unfortunately, this is a not-so-uncommon occurrence. But Dan was motivated. With high hopes in store, he pulled into the gym to find the parking lot full. The only parking spot that was open was all the way back, on the opposite of the gym. Obviously annoyed, Dan would begrudgingly take the spot and began his long walk to the gym, huffing under his breath. This was the first sign that Dan did not fully understand weight loss. He also didn't comprehend how much work he was going to need to do to lose weight for the $35,000. Too often, new weight loss trainees can think that weight loss is something that walking across the parking lot contributes to something called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. NEAT is basically the calories that we burn from activity that is not exercise. This can be things like washing your dog, making dinner, and walking across a parking lot. Many people losing weight, like Dan, made the mistake by overlooking this for extra calories burned and only focusing on exercise for burning calories. He doesn't know it yet, but he'll learn just how much extra weight he could lose if he just spent more time crossing long parking lots. Another thing Dan underestimated was how many people wanted his $35,000. As he made his way into the gym, he passed a sea of people waiting to sign up. Up until now, Dan hadn't really thought about how much weight he wanted to lose or needed to lose. But listening to others speak, he heard claims of 50 pounds, 100 pounds. He even heard one bigger guy bet he was going to lose 200 pounds. This was Dan's first inclination that this contest may not be as easy as he had thought. While he was big, he wasn't that big. In fact, he didn't even have 200 pounds to lose. And he was right. The amount of weight that a person is able to lose can heavily depend on how much they have to lose in the first place. Individuals with a higher body fat percentage are going to have an easier time losing weight. As in Dan's situation, some individuals may have 150 pounds of fat to lose, while others barely even weigh 150 pounds. At the same time, those with higher body fat percentage are able to get into a larger caloric deficit without needing to worry about things such as metabolic damage or muscle wasting. We'll see what these are later, as some of his fellow trainees will experience them. Dan really wanted to get this bike, and he realized he was going to need to get some help with his year-long weight loss journey. Luckily, the gym had plenty of trainers available that were offering their services. To market themselves, many trainers offered guarantees such as 30 pounds your first month or 5 pounds weekly. Unfortunately, all of these trainers were all booked up first, and Dan had come too late. Then Dan saw a trainer named Antonio. He didn't offer any guarantee, but he looked fit and respectable. He was also Dan's only choice. So, as there were no other options, he signed up with him. They began to talk about how they were going to tackle this weight loss journey. The first question Dan asked was, "How much weight do you think I can lose?" "I can't guarantee you anything, as it will be up to you. However, I will tell you what you need to do. Let's not even worry about specific numbers at first. Let's just focus on what you need to do." And his trainer started to break down the plan that was going to win his bike. The first thing they went over were the best exercises to use to lose weight. Dan had heard of things like fat-melting exercises and certain routines that torch fat. What are those? I want to do those. Who wouldn't want to torch fat? Unfortunately, there will be no fat torching for Dan's 365 days of training, as there are no fat-melting exercises that he can do. This is an area where many beginners can be led down the wrong path and make mistakes. Yes, there are certain types of training that will burn a few more calories than others. However, in the grand scheme of things, these extra calories would make a very small dent in Dan's overall weight loss. He'd also be giving up the primary benefit of weight training during weight loss. Dan will learn this later. Still, he heard some other trainers telling their clients about the afterburn effect. In fact, a trainer on the other side of the gym was telling his client about it. This got Dan a little worried he may lose. His opponents were going to use exercises that cause afterburn. How can he compete with that? This is referring to EPOC, exercise post-oxygen consumption. After you quit training from intense exercise, your heart and breathing will still be elevated after a session, and your body needs to come back down to its base levels. The calories it needs to do this is termed as EPOC. Many fat loss trainees will partake in things such as HIIT or intense circuit training to maximize their EPOC, as they'll keep burning calories after they train, or so they're told. Now, there's nothing wrong with these types of training and definitely have positive benefits, but EPOC isn't one. Now, EPOC does exist, but it only burns an extra 6 to 15% of calories. In practice, this only equates to around 30 to 50 extra calories per session. This means it can mean an extra 100 to 250 calories per week, or 400 to 1,000 a month. It's great that it occurs, but it shouldn't dictate your choice of training. Still, as we're speaking of fat loss trainees, many of them simply don't have the fitness levels to effectively complete this type of training. The good thing is there's a better weapon that Antonio has in store for Dan, a secret weapon to maximize his fat loss. "So what are we going to do then?" Dan asked. "We're going to focus on using exercises that are effective at maintaining muscle mass, big compound movements that use multiple muscle groups, squats, pull-ups, rows, deadlifts. These will make up the bulk of your training. These will help ensure we save your muscle mass throughout the year. This is the primary goal for resistance training during weight loss. Heck, you may even build some muscle. So don't sacrifice this benefit just so you can possibly burn a few extra calories using other types of training. Plus, they will still burn a significant amount of calories as they use so much muscle mass, and you can still get a little EPOC as a little bonus." Fair enough, that makes sense. So then how are we going to lose weight? Your nutrition. Nutrition will always be the primary way you lose weight, Antonio explained. To understand how nutrition will lead to weight loss for a year, you need to understand TDE. TDE stands for Total Daily Caloric Expenditure. This is basically how many calories Dan uses every day. It's composed of 3 parts: BMR, basal metabolic rate, physical activity, and something called the thermal effect of food. BMR is the amount of calories that the body uses to support basic life function. This is how many calories Dan would need if he laid down and didn't move all day. Things like brain function, breathing, and every other process in your body requires energy. In fact, for the majority of people, this composes the largest amount of calories and accounts for 60 to 70% of your total calories. The next section is your energy expenditure and actually comprises 2 parts, both of which Dan had dealt with already. The first is physical activity from exercise, also known as exercise activity thermogenesis or EAT. There's also NEAT or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which includes all other activities that's not exercise, like walking across the parking lot. The third part is the thermal effect of food or TF. It's important to keep in mind that all processes require energy, including the digestion and utilization of food. This is TF. the amount of calories that Dan would use simply by eating different amounts of food and accounts for about 10% of your total calories. However, beginners can increase this by eating a certain type of food. This amounts to free calories, as you don't need to do anything else but eat. In fact, if there are secrets to fat loss, this is one of them. We'll go over this later to explain in more detail. It was determined that Dan's TDEE was about 3,000 calories a day. When Dan heard 3,000 calories, he thought he could easily get away by cutting that in half, 1,500 calories a day. He really wanted to win that bike. He told Antonio his plan, which he replied with a, "Yeah, that's a really bad idea, we're not going to do that." Many new trainees overestimate what they can maintain long term. Sure, Dan might be able to maintain that diet for a week or so, but a year is a very long time. Antonio explained to him that setting up unrealistic goals is one of the fastest ways to fail on a weight loss journey. This is vital for you to understand as you begin your weight loss journey. If a plan is too extreme, you will almost certainly fail. How many times have you seen a person go on an extreme diet but only stick to it a month or two? Maybe even you have done this. As a beginner, Dan needs to understand that his excess fat is just the symptom of the real problem. You may be able to fix the symptom of excess weight for a little bit, but unless he fixes the cause, he'll gain it back. If Dan wants to be successful, he needs to adopt an active lifestyle and follow a sensible diet. The diet you eat during weight loss doesn't need to be a special diet. You just need to eat smaller portions of foods and maybe make some swaps: whole milk to skim milk, chicken thighs to chicken breast. There's really no need to do any extreme diets. Do what you can sustain. Long-term success is the only type of success. Antonio then let Dan in on a little secret. This is why the gym made the contest span a year. You often see 30-day challenges and other quick-fix type events. The gym knew these don't work. Rather, they wanted to promote a healthy lifestyle long-term, as that's the only true fix for weight loss. Okay then, what do you think I should eat? Everyone's meal plan is going to be individualized. However, a good rule of thumb is to get into a 300 to 500 caloric deficit. This is generally much smaller than most people think they should start with. For one, it's sustainable. A 300 to 500 caloric deficit is relatively mild and allows most people to follow a diet like this for an extended period of time. Another important benefit is that a mild caloric deficit can mitigate any potential muscle wasting. When our bodies are properly fed, the body will rely on stored glycogen and fat to supply energy. However, when put into a major caloric deficit, the body can break down existing muscle to gain access to building blocks of protein, amino acids. While technically this is losing weight, it's the wrong kind of weight. During your fat loss journey, ideally all of the weight you lose comes from fat. Oh, that's because muscle burns more calories than fat. While this claim is often thrown around, it's not nearly as great as some make it seem. 1 pound of muscle burns around 5 to 10 calories per day. So if you gain 10 pounds of muscle, your body will burn an extra 50 to 100 calories per day. On the other hand, 1 pound of fat may burn about 2 calories per day. So 10 pounds of fat equates to 20 calories a day. This means you're only looking at a difference of maybe a total of 30 to 80 calories a day between losing 10 pounds of muscle and 10 pounds of fat. Now 30 to 80 calories is 30 to 80 calories. So we don't want to knock that, but it's a very small amount in the grand scheme of things. Besides, there are many other better reasons to keep muscle, such as building a great shape and keeping your body strong. While Dan was learning about his diet, he wanted to ask about any special tricks he can use to increase his caloric burn. He's no expert, but he's heard of things like intermittent fasting and low-carb diets. Do those work? They can if they are able to put you in a caloric deficit. For example, if you practice intermittent fasting, but eat a caloric surplus, you're not going to lose weight. However, for some people, intermittent fasting helps to decrease their total caloric intake simply due to only having a small window of time they can eat. If this works for you, then yes, they may help you lose weight. Is there any diet I can use to help lose more weight? Glad you asked. Yes, there is. A high-protein diet has consistently been found to support and promote weight loss. As a beginner, Dan has never really experimented with high protein. What's considered high and why does it help with weight loss? There's no specific definition of what high is, but 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight is on the lower side of high. However, plans using 1 to 1.2 grams may even promote greater weight loss. Protein promotes weight loss through several angles. For one, it will keep you feeling full longer. This is because it's harder to digest and will sit in your digestive system longer. A second great reason is it can inhibit the breakdown of muscle mass. Towards the beginning of the video, we talked about why you don't want to be in a large caloric deficit. Well, increasing your protein intake can further mitigate the risk of losing muscle mass. Having higher amounts of protein will supply a larger pool of amino acids, which your body will pull from rather than break down muscle. Remember before when we spoke about a protein's high TEF? This is perhaps the most interesting thing about protein concerning weight loss. The TEF of protein is 20 to 30%. This means that for every 100 calories that Dan eats from his body, he will burn 20 to 30 just to digest it. Dan thought, so like free calories? And in a way, he's not exactly wrong. When your meal has a greater percentage of protein, you're going to burn more calories simply by eating. For this reason, trainees are encouraged to eat a higher amount of protein and decrease their carbs to compensate. Alright, so I train hard, caloric deficit, high protein, anything else? Yep, be sure you sleep well. Simply getting adequate sleep has been found to put your body in an anabolic state and encourage the breakdown of fat while in a caloric deficit. On the contrary, those who are sleep-deprived tend to hold on to more fat as they sleep, while muscle is broken down instead. Oh wait, one more thing, your secret weapon. Dan liked the sound of that. Increase your NEAT. We spoke about NEAT before, now we're going to make use of it. Too many beginners only focus on the gym for losing weight. However, that only accounts for maybe 4 to 6 hours a week. What are you doing with the rest of your time? Increasing your daily activity is one of the best tools a beginner can use to increase their overall fat loss. You've probably heard of 10,000 steps a day. This is what NEAT is. Now, there's no scientific evidence to specifically support the number 10,000. However, the idea is to get up and move more, and 10,000 steps works. Your success will depend on how you spend your time outside the gym. You will only spend about an hour in the gym, but you have 15 other waking hours. That's where the real weight loss happens. So increase your daily activity every day, no exceptions. And with that, Dan was off. He now knew what he needed to do to win his bike, and so Dan began to follow his plan just like Antonio gave him. It was a bit challenging at first, but he stuck with it. During the first month, to be honest, Dan was getting a little frustrated as other members were losing weight at a faster rate than him. Many of them were on very low-calorie diets and exercising much more than him. He began to wonder if maybe Antonio had it wrong. After the first month, he had only lost 5 pounds, while some others had lost 10, 15, and even 20 pounds. Just as Dan was getting ready to change what he was doing, it happened. Just like Antonio said it would. He saw one of the members one night at an all-you-can-eat pizza buffet eating what looked like to be enough for 3 people. He also noticed that some of the members, who at first were very enthusiastic, started to look less happy when they came to the gym. They just looked tired, and then they stopped coming altogether. But he kept on his program, slow and steady. He parked across the parking lot to get his steps in, pushed it hard in the gym, and got his nutrition right. What he found interesting was that after about a month or two, this all started becoming second nature to him. It became a normal part of his routine, so that at one point he wasn't having to try. He just did it. This must be what Antonio meant by adopting a healthy lifestyle. During this time, he saw his weight steadily dropping off. Every month, he seemed to lose 4 to 6 pounds. This continued until a year had passed, and it was time to see if his hard work paid off. As Dan got to his most recent weigh-in, he was surprised that he was the only one that showed up. It seems everyone else fell victim to the mistakes Antonio spoke about. He went to weigh himself anyways and found he lost a total of 55 pounds. Dan got his bike. More importantly, thanks to what Antonio taught him, he now knew what to do to sustain his weight loss forever. He just made sure to park his bike in the back of the parking lot. So how did this happen? You see, to burn 1 pound of fat, you must burn around 3,500 calories. If you put yourself in a daily 500 caloric deficit, this equates to around 1 pound a week. If you then sustain this for a year, you can expect to lose around 50 pounds in a year. You can then burn more or less than this depending on if you can adhere to your plan. If you start with a greater amount of fat to lose, you can use a higher deficit, which results in more weight loss. This is why beginners will be able to lose more fat during their first year, as they likely have more fat to lose. For example, those with higher body fat percentage can safely and easily use a 1,000 calorie deficit. This would result in 100 pounds in a year. Others may need to use a 300 caloric deficit, which would result in around 30 pounds or so. Therefore, you can expect to lose anywhere from 30 to 100 pounds. It's your individual factors that will dictate that. However, while some people will lose different amounts, they all occur through the same mechanisms. Increase your daily activity and control your calories. Here are the key points of sustainable weight loss in your first year of training. 1. 300 to 500 caloric deficit. 2. 0.8 to 1 grams of protein per pound of body weight. 3. Go to the gym to maintain muscle. Use your diet to control calories. 4. Increase daily activity to 10,000 steps a day. 5. Get plenty of sleep, 7 to 8 hours. And last but not least, trust the process.